His wife said, "Don't call me, I'm not your property." He replied, "Perfect, then don't come home." What he did next breaks her. "Don't call me again, Raymond. I'm not your property." Those were the last words Tonia Cole said to her husband before ending the call, laughter and music still spilling through the line like an open secret. She had no idea that the man she had just dismissed would turn that moment into the quietest turning point of their marriage. What happened in the days that followed will make you question what love, pride, and silence can truly destroy. Viewers, what would you do if your wife told you she's not your property? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The afternoon sun had begun to fade when Tonia walked into the dining room. The smell of baked chicken and roasted potatoes still hung in the air, the kind of meal Raymond looked forward to after long hours at the office. He was seated at the table, sleeves rolled, the day's exhaustion still written on his face. She stood across from him, hands folded in front of her apron, eyes wandering toward the window instead of him. Dinner started with small talk, about the neighbor's new car, about the garden, about nothing that mattered. But underneath her quiet tone, he sensed a rehearsed calm, the kind that only precedes something unsettling. Halfway through the meal, she cleared her throat and said, "Raymond, there's something I want to tell you." He looked up, waiting. "I've been thinking. I need a little time for myself." He set his fork down slowly. "Time for yourself?" She nodded quickly, like she wanted to say it fast before she lost courage. "Yes, just a short break. I was thinking of going on a trip with some friends. Maybe 2 weeks. Just to relax. Nothing serious." His gaze held steady, his tone controlled. "What kind of friends?" "Just the girls," she said. "Nora, Faith, maybe Janet. We've been talking about it for months. Everyone needs to breathe, Raymond. I've been here for years, cooking, cleaning, just living the same days on repeat." He leaned back, studying her. "And you think running off for 2 weeks will fix that?" Her eyes hardened. "It's not running off. It's called taking a break. I've earned that right." He didn't speak for a while. The silence between them stretched thin, taut like a rope that could snap with one wrong word. "Tonia," he said finally, his tone low but firm, "I'm not comfortable with this." "Why?" she asked, her voice rising a little. "You don't trust me?" "It's not about trust," he said. "It's about principle. You're my wife. You can't just wake up one day and decide to disappear for 2 weeks without reason." She pushed her plate aside, frustration clouding her face. "See? That's exactly the problem. You think everything I do needs your permission." "I think marriage requires consideration," he replied calmly. "You don't just make decisions that affect both of us without a conversation. You call that control. I call it respect." The words hung in the air between them. She didn't respond. Instead, she stood up, picked up her wine glass, and walked toward the kitchen. The clink of the glass against the counter was sharper than it should have been. Raymond sat still for a moment, then rose and followed. "You can take a day if you need to," he said softly from the doorway. "Go visit your mother, spend time with family. But 2 weeks away from home, no. That's not something I can agree to." She turned around, leaning against the counter, her face unreadable. "You make it sound like I'm asking to leave the country. It's just Florida, Raymond. Everyone takes vacations." He shook his head slowly. "Everyone doesn't abandon their home to go find themselves." Her eyes flared. "You're impossible." "Maybe," he said, "but I'm consistent." The sound of the refrigerator humming filled the quiet. She brushed past him and went upstairs without another word. He stood there in the kitchen for a while, staring at the doorway she'd disappeared through. He wasn't angry. Anger was too simple. What he felt was something heavier, quieter. When he finally returned to the table, her seat was empty, the candle still burning low beside her half-eaten meal. He sat back down and finished what was left of his dinner in silence, every bite tasting more of truth than food. Later that night, he found her on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when he entered. "You're really not going to support me on this, are you?" she asked, her tone flat. No, he said simply. I'm not. She let out a soft, disbelieving laugh and went back to her screen. The glow from the phone reflected on her face, and for the first time in years, Raymond realized he was sitting across from a stranger who wore his wife's skin. He turned away and walked upstairs, each step slow and deliberate, the kind of silence that comes when a man begins to prepare for the end of something he once built with his whole heart. The days that followed drifted like slow-moving smoke, quiet, strange, uneasy. The tension that began that night at dinner lingered in the house, invisible but heavy enough to bend the air. Tonia spoke less, moved differently, smiled in fragments that never reached her eyes. Raymond noticed, but he didn't speak on it. He went to work, came home, sat across from her in silence that said more than words ever could. Sometimes she tried to sound light-hearted, humming while she cooked, scrolling on her phone during breakfast. But her laughter always arrived late, as if rehearsed. A week passed. On Thursday morning, the air was unusually still. She had woken early, made him coffee, kissed his cheek, and said she'd step out later to visit her mother. Her tone was sweet, deliberate, almost soft enough to deceive. Raymond didn't question her. He looked at her for a long moment before heading to the office. "Drive safe," he said simply, and she smiled, that gentle, distant smile that always hides something behind it. By the time the sun slipped below the city's skyline, his body ached from meetings and phone calls. The evening traffic crawled like it had no intention of letting anyone get home. He thought about the smell of her stew that usually filled the kitchen by now, the faint hum of gospel songs from the radio she always left on. But when he pushed the front door open, the house greeted him with silence. Not peace, silence. He stepped inside, flicked on the lights, and stood for a moment at the threshold. The dining table was clear, the counter empty. Her sandals, usually tossed carelessly by the hallway, were gone. The faint perfume she wore still lingered, but the house already felt larger, hollow, as though someone had pulled its heart out. "Tonia?" he called. His voice echoed faintly through the living room. He dropped his keys on the side table and checked the kitchen, the bedroom, the patio. Nothing. He opened the closet. Half her clothes were missing. Her jewelry box stood open, lighter than it used to be. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It rang twice before she picked up. The background was noisy. Music, laughter, the rush of wind. Her tone was light, almost careless. "Raymond, why are you calling?" "Because I came home and you're not here," he said, his voice steady. "Where are you, Tonia?" "I told you I was going on a trip," she replied, irritation cutting through her words. "Why are you stalking me? I'm not your property, Raymond. Don't call me. I'll be back after the trip." There was a short pause, the kind that separates emotion from decision. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, flat, and final. "Then don't bother to come back." Before she could respond, he ended the call. He stood in the center of the living room, the phone still in his hand, staring at nothing. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background, the wall clock ticked on, counting the seconds of something dying quietly inside him. Then, slowly, he walked to the study. He picked his phone and called Mason Boyd, a private investigator. When Mason answered, his voice was calm, clipped, businesslike. "Boyd speaking." "It's Cole," Raymond said, his voice steady. "My wife's gone to Florida. I need you to find out where she really is, who she's with, where she stays, everything." "Got it," Mason replied. "Same procedure?" "Faster this time," Raymond said. "No delays. I want the truth on my table before the weekend." He hung up, turned off the light in the study, and stood by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered against the quiet neighborhood. Somewhere a dog barked, then fell silent. Raymond pressed his hand against the cold glass and exhaled slowly. She had left once before, years ago, only for a night, after an argument about money. But she had returned then, tearful, apologetic. This time, the tone in her voice told him she was not coming back in the same way. Downstairs, her favorite mug still sat beside the sink, a ring of lipstick around the rim. He picked it up, washed it carefully, and set it on the rack to dry. He moved slowly through the house, switching off lights one by one, as though performing a ritual for something that had already died. By midnight, he sat in the living room, the faint glow from the street lamp spilling through the curtains. The world outside was asleep, but his mind was wide awake, running through memories that suddenly felt like lies dressed as love. The sound of her laughter, her touch, her promises, all replayed in his head like a story he once believed but no longer recognized. He leaned back against the couch, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, and whispered to himself, not in anger, but in realization. She doesn't know what she's just started. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, under warm hotel lights and foreign laughter, Tonia believed she had escaped. She didn't know the man she had dismissed so easily had already begun to write the quiet ending to their story, not with noise, not with violence, but with patience sharp enough to cut through every illusion she had left. The next morning arrived without the sound of her voice. The house, stripped of her presence, had a strange stillness, the kind that makes even running water sound too loud. Raymond stood in the kitchen, drinking coffee gone lukewarm, his thoughts already organized in quiet precision. He didn't call her again. He didn't text. He went about his day as though nothing had changed, but everything had. At the office, his assistant noticed how focused he seemed. The same man who used to hum softly while sketching building plans now worked in complete silence, his eyes sharp, deliberate, detached. He met clients, signed contracts, smiled when necessary, and kept his composure, like a man who had decided that emotion was a luxury he could no longer afford. By the third day, the envelope arrived. It was delivered discreetly, just before noon, by a young man in a dark jacket who greeted him with a small nod before leaving. Raymond locked the office door before opening it. Inside were photographs, clear, undeniable. Tonia, her hair pulled back the way he'd always liked it, standing on a balcony beside another man. A tall man, broad-shouldered, expensive watch glinting under the sunlight. In one photo, her head was tilted against his shoulder, smiling. In another, she was sitting on his lap with a smile that could cut glass. Beneath the photographs was a small black flash drive, unmarked and thin. Raymond plugged it into his laptop, and the screen filled with motion and sound. The low hum of an ocean breeze, faint laughter, a camera held steady from a distance. The first clip showed them stepping out of a car at a beachfront hotel. She was wearing the white sundress he had bought her for their last anniversary. The man's hand slid around her waist as they entered the lobby, his fingers resting where a wedding ring once meant something. The next cut showed them on a balcony, her body turned into his as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then the kiss came, unhurried, deliberate, and final. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 8:17 p.m. He didn't stop the video. He watched them enter the hotel suite together, watched the elevator doors close, the hallway returning to silence. Then he shut the laptop. No expression, no anger, just stillness so cold it became clarity. Beneath the photographs was a report, precise and clinical. Dates, locations, check-ins, hotel reservations, dinner receipts, all under the name Tonia Cole. She hadn't even bothered to use an alias. He sat back in his chair and stared at the photos, not with shock, but with the slow realization that every suspicion he had once dismissed was now laid bare before him. He felt no rage, just the final quiet confirmation that love, when broken, doesn't explode. It crumbles quietly into facts. He turned the photographs over one by one, then gathered them neatly and placed them back inside the envelope. He called Mason. "It's done," the detective said simply. "I saw the photos," Raymond replied. His tone was level, measured. "Thank you. What do you want me to do next?" "Nothing," he said. "You've done enough." There was a brief silence before the man on the other end spoke again, softer this time. "Cole, I've been doing this for 20 years. Some men break when they see the truth. You sound like you were waiting for it. Raymond's reply came without hesitation. I was. When the call ended, he sat at his desk for a long moment, letting the stillness surround him. Then, methodically, he opened his planner and began to write a list, not of grievances or questions, but of actions. It was how his mind worked. He solved problems by structure. The top of the page bore a single word: closure. When he returned home that evening, the house greeted him the same way: quiet, untouched. Her framed pictures still lined the hallway, smiling at him from another life. He walked through every room slowly, not with grief, but with a steady detachment. He stopped in their bedroom, where her vanity mirror still held traces of her: a brush with strands of hair caught in its bristles, perfume bottles arranged by color, a half-open jewelry box. He reached out and shut the lid softly, as though closing a chapter that no longer needed to be read again. The next morning he called his lawyer, Mr. Hale, a man who had been both advisor and old college friend. The voice on the other end was warm but curious. Raymond, it's been a while. What can I do for you? I need to start a process, he said. A quiet one. There was a pause. Divorce? Yes. Do you have grounds? Adultery. I will send you evidence with a copy of our prenuptial agreement. Then we'll make it swift, Hale replied. I'll draft the first papers tonight. You'll need to review and sign. Do you want me to notify her formally or? No, send everything through me first. Understood. After hanging up, Raymond leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't thinking about the betrayal anymore. He was thinking about logistics, about how order had always been his armor against chaos. This was not revenge yet, not exactly. It was preparation, and preparation was a language he spoke fluently. By evening he called the locksmith. The man arrived within the hour, carrying new locks and spare keys. Moving in or moving out? The locksmith asked lightly. Neither, Raymond said. Just securing what's mine. He watched as the locks were replaced, one at the front door, one at the back, one for the garage. Each turn of the screwdriver sounded final. When the man left, Raymond sat on the staircase, the new keys heavy in his hand. He felt the faint hum of something he hadn't felt in months, not joy but certainty. In the stillness of that night he packed the rest of her belongings. He moved slowly, with purpose, folding her clothes carefully, wrapping her jewelry in tissue, placing everything in boxes. He didn't throw anything away. He wasn't angry. He simply wanted no trace of her in a home she had chosen to abandon. When the final box was sealed, he leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. Somewhere between heartbreak and relief, he understood what freedom actually sounded like. Not a scream, not a song, just silence deep enough to hear your own resolve. And though the papers weren't yet signed, though her laughter might still echo somewhere far away, the part of him that had once waited for her was already gone. The only thing that remained now was what he would do next. And Raymond Cole was a man who never left anything half-finished. Days have passed after the envelope arrived, and the silence in Raymond Cole's house had taken on a new kind of shape. Not the silence of loss, but of order. He moved through his mornings with a calm precision that bordered on ritual. Coffee, paperwork, a brief call with his lawyer, then hours at the office where everything ran with mechanical ease. He no longer felt the weight of what had happened. He had accepted it the way men accept the weather, unchangeable, inevitable, and indifferent. On the fifth morning, Patrick Hale called to say the papers were ready. Everything's clean, airtight, signed where it should be, Patrick told him. You only need to come by and put your name on it. Raymond drove to the firm just before noon. The day was bright, and the city hummed with the rhythm of people whose lives hadn't fallen apart. In the conference room, the documents were laid out neatly on polished oak, 2 witnesses waiting in quiet professionalism. He picked up the pen, read the line that began with his full name, and signed. No hesitation, no second read, just a line drawn with steady conviction, ending 5 years of a life he no longer recognized. When it was done, Patrick watched him curiously. "You sure you don't want to wait till she's back in town? These things can—" Raymond slipped the pen back into its holder and said quietly, "No, she made her decision before she left. I'm just making mine official." The drive home felt like forever. When he got home, he loaded luggage, boxes, and everything that represents her into the trunk of his car, stacking them carefully until there was no room left for anything else. The sky above was wide and clear, the kind of sky that mocks the heaviness of human decisions. He drove in silence through the long suburban roads, the hum of the engine the only sound between his thoughts. When he reached her parents' home, he parked by the curb and stepped out. Her father, an aging man with a stern face softened by time, came out to meet him, wiping his hands on a towel. Her mother appeared behind him, confusion already forming in her eyes. "Raymond," her father said, puzzled but polite. "This is a surprise. Everything all right?" Raymond nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. I came to return something that belongs here." He opened the trunk and one by one carried the boxes into their hallway. Her father followed him in silence, his expression unreadable. When the last box was set down, Raymond reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 manila envelopes. He held them out to her father. "This one," he said, tapping the first envelope lightly, "is her divorce document. It's final, already signed." He paused, his tone steady but edged with something deeper. "And this one contains the reason why." Her father didn't reach for them immediately. His eyes searched Raymond's face for a trace of anger, but there was none. Just calm resolve, the kind that doesn't waver once it's found its footing. "I'm not here to make a scene," Raymond continued softly. "I respect you both too much for that. But I thought it was right that the truth returns home the same way she left, unannounced." Her mother covered her mouth, eyes wide, whispering something under her breath as her husband finally took the envelopes. Raymond gave a faint nod, stepped back toward the door and added, "I hope you'll take care of her when she comes back. She'll need it." He left before they could ask questions. The drive back felt strangely light. The air through the open window carried the faint smell of pine, and for the first time in months, he realized he wasn't replaying conversations in his head anymore. The words had stopped. The noise had ended. He stopped at his bank branch downtown, walked in, and greeted the manager with his usual quiet politeness. "I need to revoke all shared access and deactivate all supplementary cards immediately," he said. The manager, surprised but discreet, nodded quickly. Within minutes, the digital connection that tied her name to his accounts was gone, deleted like a password no longer needed. By evening, the city was awash in amber light when he pulled back into his driveway. The house, unchanged, waited for him with the same still air and empty rooms. He went inside, loosened his tie, and set the new house keys on the counter. He walked to the cabinet in the corner of the living room, opened it, and pulled out a bottle of aged whiskey, a gift from a client years ago he'd never opened. He poured himself a glass, the liquid catching the gold of the sunset streaming through the window. He sat down in the quiet, turning the glass slowly in his hand. The first sip burned slightly, a warmth that spread through his chest and down to the pit of his stomach. He stared at the fading light, at the way it colored the walls in hues of peace rather than loneliness. The house felt different now, not empty, but clean, reclaimed. The sound of the ice melting in the glass filled the space where her laughter used to live, and for the first time since she left, Raymond Cole exhaled without the weight of someone else's shadow in his lungs. He raised the glass once more and murmured to the quiet room, "To endings that come on time." The whiskey caught the light again, deep amber and honest, before he took another long, deliberate sip and let the night close gently around him. The morning sun broke over the Atlantic, scattering light across the balcony where Tonia lounged with a drink in her hand. The laughter from the night before still echoed faintly in her head, mingling with the faint hum of waves far below. She had convinced herself she deserved this. After all the dull years at home, the routines, the silence of domestic repetition. Now, wrapped in new perfume and attention, she felt reborn. But that morning, as she reached for her card to settle the bill for breakfast, the card was declined. She tried another. Declined again. The receptionist smiled politely, waiting. Tonia frowned, pulled another from her purse and ran it through. Declined. The sound of that word, flat, final, seemed to echo louder than it should have. It must be a system error, she murmured, forcing a smile. Try again. The woman tried twice more, then shook her head. I'm sorry, ma'am. It keeps bouncing back. Tonia laughed lightly, a brittle, awkward sound. She opened her phone banking app. The screen refused to load, showing a string of failed logins. Something tightened in her chest. She stepped aside and dialed Raymond's number. The line rang once, then stopped. She tried again. Nothing. The third time, the automated voice said coldly, "The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service." For a moment, she stood still, phone clutched to her ear as a slow chill spread through her. She tried calling Nora, but even her friend didn't pick up. Finally, she called her mother. "Tonia?" Her mother's voice burst through the receiver, strained and anxious. "Where have you been? We've been trying to reach since yesterday." "Mom, relax," she said, half laughing. "I'm fine. I've just been away with friends." There was a pause. Then her mother's voice lowered, trembling. "Come home, Tonia. Now." The line went dead before she could reply. By 10 a.m., she was packing in a rush, confusion sharpening every movement. The man she'd spent the week with still slept on the bed, turned toward the window, oblivious. She didn't wake him. She just zipped the suitcase, slipped out, and drove. Hours later, the familiar streets of their neighborhood appeared through the windshield. Her pulse quickened, not from guilt, but fear she couldn't name. The house looked as it always had, the trimmed lawn, the silver car in the driveway. Relief washed through her until she tried the front door. The key refused to turn. She tried again, harder. The lock didn't budge. She stepped back, staring, then knocked once, twice. The new security light flicked on, casting a bright glow over the porch. She stared at the door one last time, her reflection fractured in the glass. The handle gleamed cold under her hand. She tried calling him again. Same disconnected tone. For a long while she sat in her car outside the gate, staring at the house, the home she thought she still owned. The windows were dark, the curtains closed. From where she sat, she could see the faint glimmer of the whiskey glass he had left on the living room table. She finally started the engine, reversing slowly out of the driveway. The road ahead blurred under her tears, but she kept driving. She didn't know where else to go except to her parents' house. By the time she arrived, the sun had fallen. Her mother opened the door first, eyes red and swollen, as if she had already cried for something Tonia didn't yet understand. Her father stood behind her, holding 2 manila envelopes in his hands. He didn't speak as she stepped inside. She dropped her purse on the floor and looked between them. "What's going on? Why are you looking at me like that?" Her father's voice was low, deliberate. "Raymond dropped these here yesterday." She frowned, reaching out. He handed her the first envelope. The bold black letters across the top read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The signatures were fresh, her name and his printed clearly on every page. Her voice cracked. He filed for divorce?" Her father didn't answer. He handed her the second envelope. "Open it." Her fingers trembled as she slid out the contents. Photographs fell onto the table. Herself on the balcony, the beach, the man's arm around her. The flash drive followed, landing with a soft clink beside the images. Her knees gave way before she could stop herself. Her mother turned away, whispering a prayer under her breath. Her father's voice, steady but hard, filled the room. "You left without a word. You shamed your home, your marriage, and yourself. He didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't destroy you." He just walked away like a man who finally understood what peace costs. Tonia covered her face with her hands, the sound of her sobs filling the room. The flash drive lay between them, small, silent, waiting for her to confirm the rest of her undoing. Tonia learned too late that a husband's silence can speak louder than 1,000 arguments. She mistook Raymond's calm for weakness, never realizing that the same man who once built his world around her could also rebuild it without her. Pride made her believe love was control, and freedom meant walking away. But freedom without respect only leads to regret. Raymond didn't destroy her. He simply chose peace over pain, dignity over drama. Viewers, if you were Raymond, would you have done the same? Or would you have waited for her to come back? Drop your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and true-to-life stories.